Welcome to the Electric Spirit Podcast with your host, psychic medium Jamie Lynn. Our guest today, John Labman, is a dedicated expert in trauma recovery and spiritual awakening. John's journey from a troubled past marked by home trauma, school bullying, and spiritual confusion to becoming a beacon of healing and self-realization is both compelling and inspiring. His initial foray into professional life began in technical writing, but he soon discovered a deeper calling in the therapeutic realm, starting as a licensed massage therapist. This path led him to pursue a master's in counseling psychology and ultimately to direct a trauma treatment program, where he applies his extensive knowledge and empathy to support others in their healing processes. With certifications from renowned specialists like Dr. Bessel van der Kolk and Dr. Bruce Perry, as well as training in energy healing and yoga, John's holistic approach integrates a rich tapestry of therapeutic and spiritual practices. Over the past 23 years, he has guided countless individuals from a state of suffering to one of profound peace and contentment. His published works, including books and articles, further reflect his commitment to helping others navigate their own paths to liberation. John's extensive experience and ongoing dedication to both personal and professional growth make him a unique and invaluable voice in the field of healing and spiritual awakening. You can find John on his website simplyawake.com.
Hi, John. Welcome to the Electric Spirit Podcast.
Hi, Jamie. Thank you for having me here. And I want to tell all your listeners to please give you a 5-star rating and recommend you, because this is a gift that you're giving all of us, the kind of education we never got in school. So thanks.
Oh, that's really nice of you to say. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's awesome. And so I guess we'll just dive in.
Okay.
That's fine. So you've had a diverse journey from administrative writing to becoming a trauma treatment specialist, a spiritual guide, and even a cult member.
Yes.
What were some pivotal moments in your life that led you to this path?
Well, I would say to kind of start at the present, I'm doing what's called liberation therapy, which is to help empower people, first of all, to learn how to be human beings, because nobody teaches us that. And then secondly, once we get the fundamentals of being human, we have the capacity to awaken spiritually as the divine. And I learned that through a very arduous path. And so I started out with sexual abuse at home, and then went on to being bullied at school. My spiritual path started because I got introduced to an international school abroad, and I was desperate to get away from home and school. So I prayed that if there was a God, I would get into the school and get the scholarship that they said that I didn't qualify for. And I got the scholarship. Took a whole month because there was an air postal strike at that time in the UK, and there was no post going back and forth for a whole month. But I prayed like every day that month, like crazy. And so that started my spiritual journey at about age 16. And I became an evangelical Christian, even though I was born and raised in a Jewish household, and really studied New Testament, have a sort of an avid relationship with God through that lens of evangelical Protestantism and eventually Calvinism. Calvinism, the first doctrine is total depravity. So they believe the human being is totally depraved. And that kind of set me on the path to go to university at a Christian college. And from there, because my parents divorced, my mother divorced her second husband, I didn't have a home to go to in between school breaks. What I did was I was invited to join this community that was a church in the denomination that ran my college. And after I joined it, there was a split in the church, and the elder that I had stayed with one summer was booted out of the church and excommunicated. And that started the devolution of that church into a mind-bending cult, really, or you would say a mind-washing cult, I think is the word I'm looking for. And so I spent about 7 years there. We took lifetime vows to be there forever. We were supposed to obey the church elders in doctrine and in life, which eventually meant that you really couldn't think for yourself at all. You couldn't question them. And if they told you to stop associating with your work colleagues and your family, you had to do that. So after 7 years of that, without going into too much detail, I finally decided they had put me in a double bind. I really couldn't stay and I really couldn't leave. Something in me said, this isn't true. This isn't the way God is. So I got up one day and left. I really fled for my life. I was really frightened. I didn't have anywhere to go to. I had a job, but no home. And that started the process of going to a regular therapist in Princeton, New Jersey. And I was living in the King of Prussia, Pennsylvania area in those days. And Princeton was about an hour and a half. So I was traveling once a week to see this woman in Princeton. And she basically told me, you know what, you're going to have to learn to think for yourself and decide what's true. And she treated my break with the cult as if I had been going through a divorce, which was very smart of her. And in the time that I was with her, I learned to ask what's actually really true of all that I've been taught, of all that I think, what's really true. And I discovered, in fact, that what was true was that I had some hope to be alive, even though they told me I was going to go to hell. And that if, in fact, I was gay, which I did tell them I thought I was, that I was going to have to learn to accept that that's the way God made me, rather than feel like I was condemned for being gay, which is what that cult believed. So that was the turning point that really set me on the path to becoming a therapist eventually. And then long after a spiritual awakening occurred in 2001, I discovered through events in the family that other people had also been sexually assaulted and abused. And all of that came up into memory, or enough of it to know what had happened. And at that time, I was becoming a supervised and licensed professional counselor. I was going through supervision hours, which is what we have to do to become licensed. And I was working in a rehab facility for drug and alcohol patients, and discovering that a lot of them were also traumatized. And so that's how I became a trauma treatment specialist. Once I got my license, I was transferred from that division to the mental health division, where I ran a program called the Trauma Treatment Program, and we educated 30 clinicians with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's a very famous international trauma specialist, and his staff of people from Boston University and Harvard, and then went into private practice. And there I've combined both the spirituality of the Eastern mystical path and the psychology of trauma treatment and anxiety and depression treatment.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. What a interesting story.
Thank you.
I'm glad you got out of that cult.
Me too.
Yeah.
The leader of the cult just died about a year ago. And so some people are apparently still there. I don't know what they're doing
Oh,
or how they're doing, but I'm
yeah.
certainly glad I didn't stay there.
Right. And it was a religious cult.
It
Sounds
was.
like, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
Calvinism is a branch of Presbyterianism. And, you know,
yeah.
as I said, the basic premise is that people are totally depraved.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can't trust ourselves and we can't believe in our own feelings and thoughts. And so kind of challenging that has been a way that I've learned to help other people.
Yeah.
We don't learn growing up that a lot of the thoughts that we have that generate automatically on the left side of our brain, they're false. They're fantasies, they're anxieties, they're wishes, they're wants. They're not truths. And a lot of those truths are lost to us because we don't know how to sift through our thoughts and discover what's true and what isn't true. The other
Yeah.
thing is we don't know where our emotions come from or what they're based on. Are they based on some fantasy in my head? Or are they based on some actual event that happened? And if we don't know the origin of our emotions, we don't know whether they're like Bessel van der Kolk said, whether they're really energy in motion for positive change or whether they could just be destructive. And because I also went to method acting training in New York in my 30s after I left the cult, because I was a singer training with a Broadway coach who said, oh yeah, you can sing on Broadway, but you're going to have to learn how to act. Because I learned that you could create emotion from a false scenario in your head, and it was real emotion, you could really feel it in your body, and the audience could feel it, but it was based on a story that you made up.
Mhm.
It started to make sense to me that we make up a lot of stories and we get roiled in a lot of emotion that's based on falsehoods. And that impedes our spiritual growth and our personal peace. Because in the Hindu mystical tradition, we are Sat Chit Ananda, which is truth, consciousness, love, bliss, freedom, and peace. That's what that complicated word means. And underneath it all, that's what we really are. We have within us a built-in truth meter. When our body is uncomfortable, it's probably because either somebody's telling us something not true or we're telling ourselves something untrue. Just like if you talk to a lie detector machine and you lied, the machine registers a physiological change in your body. So
Right.
whether you're saying it out loud or you're just saying it internally in your own head, your body is registering some kind of an adrenaline response when something is going off in your head that's not true. And this creates an enormous amount of distress. And your listeners, I'm sure, are very aware of how much distress they live with, how much anxiety, how much unnecessary suffering they live with every day. And that's why so many people are on the spiritual
Sorry.
path, because they want solutions to that. That's why they come to someone like you and want reassurance about an afterlife. That's why they come to someone like me and they say to me, well, teach me how to deal with my thoughts and feelings. Teach me how to meditate and be mindful so I can wake up to my spiritual nature. Because they're struggling with these problems all the time, and nobody's ever taught any of us what to do with our thoughts and our feelings, let alone how to meditate or be mindful.
You're a massage therapist. So
Yeah, I
cool.
studied, I became a licensed massage therapist in New York in around 1992 because I had worked with some people who taught me how to live in the present moment. They were really students of a student of Sri Bhagavan Rajneesh, also known as Osho.
Okay.
And they did a combination of deep tissue massage therapy, breath work, and counseling.
Oh.
And it kind of made me maybe go, oh, wow, I'd like to do all of this. The fastest way for me to begin to work with people, because otherwise I was an administrative wonk. I sort of did word processing and, computer data entry and really boring stuff. The quickest way for me to work with people wasn't to go to graduate school at that point. It was to get a massage license. So I did that. After that license, I did take a couple of graduate courses at New York University in counseling, but it was rehab counseling, so it was only about work. It was not really as juicy as I wanted it to be. And so instead, once I met my partner of 29 years now, we both took a training in psychic and energetic healing for 3 years with a teacher who had worked with Barbara Brennan at the school called Hands of Light. And so we took a certification for 3 years in energy healing and psychic healing. And at the end of that time, because the teacher was kind of a narcissist, unfortunately, I really felt disempowered rather than empowered. And I felt like I'd be disempowering my clients. So I went right into graduate school to become a counseling psychologist.
Oh,
And
I see.
that's kind of the complete path educationally. But once I finished graduate school, my thesis was on whether yoga was compatible with psychotherapy. And I discovered, yes, in fact, it was. And so I took a yoga teacher training right after graduate school, and I took a 500-hour cert in that. And so I always taught my clients meditation after that. When anybody that was willing to learn it, I would teach them meditation right away.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's
So
really nice.
And that was when it
Yeah.
wasn't cool and it wasn't, part of psychology to do that, but I did it anyway. That was
I
that
see.
was
Yeah,
like in
right.
2001.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. And you also help people in other ways. So how can people achieve massive success without constant burnout, anxiety, and exhaustion? So you help people with that as well, right?
It's a great question. They can achieve massive success by learning to differentiate between true thoughts and false thoughts. And anything that isn't absolutely true, that you can't find evidence for, you have to treat it like it's false. It's pretty harsh for some people to hear that distinction. The problem is, though, the false thoughts create a lot of what causes burnout. They create a lot of anxiety and tension and worry. They typically create sad, mad, or scared emotions, those false thoughts. And so if we can eliminate, if we can learn what to do with the thoughts that show up that are false, that takes a lot of the burnout away, because now we're not spending kind of hours and hours in our heads listening to nonsense, what I call nonsense, which is the not sense oriented. And staying present with our senses also is a great way to avoid burnout and exhaustion. Because if I listen to my body will tell me, hey, Jonathan, it's time for some rest. Or, hey, you better drink some water. Or, hey, you need to stand up and stretch because your back is going to hurt. If I don't learn to listen to my body, and I don't learn to deal with my thoughts, and I don't learn to figure out which emotions are useful and which ones are useless, and I spend a lot of extra energy producing no results, producing conflict, really, instead of producing good results. And once you know what's true and you know what emotion is useful, you can go right to your goals without a lot of interference and a lot of negative, draining, kind of energy sucking emotion and thought.
Oh, I see. That's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for explaining that.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And how can individuals experience personal breakthroughs without ever picking up another self-help book?
Well, the first thing that I tell people is just stop and notice what you're sensing right now. You know, as a psychic medium, and your audience probably knows as they've listened to you, that listening to the body and the senses and the intuition is the way to bring yourself out of a lot of the chatter in your head that sort of drives you cuckoo, and back into your body and your senses, which is where we contact reality and eternity. We contact it not through the mind, but through the body and the senses. And if they can just, stop for a minute, for instance, and you in the audience, you're listening to us, sit up straight, just relaxed, close your eyes for a moment, take 3 deep breaths through your nose. Listen to the sounds in the room, feel your body on the chair, and just breathe. And when you're tempted to think, just bring your attention back to your sensations, your senses. And in that brief little 30-second period, you can open your eyes again if they're closed. You'll already feel 1 to 5% more relaxed than you did before. And so the way to achieve what you want without a lot of subterfuge or static is keep coming back to the body and the senses, and keep coming away from the mind, and especially any of the false thoughts that it creates. You're automatically in touch with eternity and infinity. In the body, you don't have any felt sense of boundaries or time. So you can have a direct spiritual experience very quickly, and certainly relax very quickly. I mean, the spiritual experience may take a little more explanation, but the stopping and the noticing yourself and the putting down the millions of self-help books, that's how you start. And then you have to pick a path that resonates with you, that you can verify by your own experience rather than listening to someone else tell you. And your own experience will tell you if it's true or false. Then you really don't need I mean, I have been through, in 50 years of seeking, so many retreats and courses and books and teachers. And I often missed the most important one, which is right here.
Yeah, right.
So
Yeah, we're
start with
always,
yourself and stop
yeah.
listening everywhere else and come back to what's simple. Spiritual awakening is very simple.
Yeah, I agree. That was well said.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah. And what role does spirituality play in your counseling practice? And how do you integrate spiritual principles into the therapeutic process?
A wonderful question. I do it carefully. There are people that are not overtly interested in spiritual life at all, even though I think all life is spiritual life. And so I'm not out to evangelize them and make them converts into Eastern mysticism now rather than Calvinism. So what I do is I ascertain where are they in their lives, and I teach them the principles that I would teach any spiritual aspirant, but without the spiritual language. So what I call thought busting or challenging your thoughts is a well-known psychological technique called cognitive behavioral therapy, but can also be applied in spiritual life. You may have heard of a book called Loving What Is by Byron Katie. It's an example of cognitive behavioral therapy for lay people. And similarly with emotion, I teach people to look for where their emotion comes from. Now, they may not have any interest in meditation as a spiritual practice, but I teach meditation as a relaxation practice. And similarly with mindfulness, mindfulness is really just a kind of a walking, moving meditation where you're paying attention to your senses rather than the nonsense in your brain. And so all of those skills are sort of a crossways path. You could take them spiritually or just leave them psychologically. But they're all very simple tools. And so if people are only interested in psychological well-being, I only go that far with them. If they're interested in the spiritual awakening, then that can take them all the way to liberation.
Oh, and given your background in various spiritual traditions and psychological practices, how do you tailor your approach to meet the unique needs of each client?
Well, the first thing that you do is, and I do, is listen very carefully, like anybody in the
Mhm.
audience would be listening if they want to try to get to know somebody that they meet. So you listen very carefully. What is the person concerned about? What other experiences have they had in therapy, maybe the ones that weren't so good? What experiences have they had spiritually? What frightens them? What gives them pleasure? Really, some basic questions. And you
Yeah.
sit and sort of intuitively get a sense of them just by receiving the energy that they're giving off. I'm not trying to read their beads, like I was taught to do in psychic and energetic healing school, but I am getting a good sense of who they are. And then I'm also getting a sense of how they use language. And how they use language is very important in me understanding them and in them understanding that I can speak their language and so can feel their pain with them.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
So that's
Very
how I get
good.
started.
Yeah, sure. Sure. And you've worked extensively with trauma and mental health issues. What are some common misconceptions people have about trauma recovery and spiritual liberation?
People think that if they have an experience or a state change in a spiritual liberation, then it will
Mhm.
heal all the damage to the brain and the brain organs that's caused by trauma. And even though there's tremendous amount of healing that can be done with, the practice of being mindful or present. For
Yeah.
instance, Bessel van der Kolk had a yoga program at his center, and the women that were taking this program were all diagnosed with PTSD, but after 10 one-hour sessions of very mindful, very permission-oriented yoga, nobody touched them unless they allowed it for instance, half of them lost the PTSD diagnosis. But what I would say is, while it's very possible to learn to live in the present moment, there are still going to be times when there are emotional flashbacks from traumatic memory that the liberated person will have to deal with. And also, the organs of the amygdala and the hippocampus in the brain can sometimes be permanently damaged, especially if there's a lot of early trauma like I experienced. So I myself, for instance, take a very small dosage of antidepressant medicine, which keeps me sleeping at night. I don't really need it for anxiety or depression, but
Yeah.
if I don't take it, I don't sleep. So I've learned, and I tried to get off that medicine 5 different times, that the amygdala is, in my case, permanently damaged, and the hippocampus, the volume is slightly smaller than it should be, and all the liberation in the world is not going to change the brain and heal the brain on a physiological basis. So I want people who've been traumatized to understand that liberation doesn't solve all the residue of the trauma, but what it does allow is for us to be sitting in our true nature, which is love, contentment, freedom, peace, and truthfulness. It does allow us to have a totally normal and ordinary life, which anybody who's had trauma is just wishing for all the time. So
Yeah.
there is a great life to be had, but all the residue of trauma can't be eliminated with liberation or with therapy.
Right, exactly. That makes sense. And what advice would you give to someone who is just starting their journey of self-discovery and healing? And what should they expect and how can they stay motivated?
The way to stay motivated is to notice whether they're still suffering or not. And in my own journey, how I started was sort of groping blindly. And I think we have to start listening to our intuition. For instance, I was a singer and I went to method acting school. And later I learned from Bessel van der Kolk that these intuitive decisions that I was making were part of a healing path that they recommended to a lot of people. That drama therapy was well known to help trauma survivors, that singing was well known, that yoga was well known. All of these things I did before I even knew I was a trauma survivor. So following the intuition into what seems to be healing is useful. But I would say also, don't trust people who give you easy answers like, I'm going to fix you like that. Realize that you have to work to learn how to be a human being first. You have to learn how to deal with your thoughts and your emotions. And that is really going to help you on the path because, especially if you've been traumatized, nobody's taught you anything about how to properly be a human being. So
Yeah.
start simple and start small and start with what's in front of you and start with what you can verify and validate actually works for you. Don't believe it just because somebody says, oh, this is going to fix you. If you're not getting results, that's not the place for you to be.
Right, exactly. So it's almost like tuning into themselves once again. It's like you said earlier, just
That's right.
listen to yourself. Yeah. And
Yeah.
you've written several books and contributed to various publications, which is impressive. And how has writing influenced your work as a counselor and a spiritual guide? And what do you hope readers take away from your books?
I think that the writing has allowed me to encapsulate the many things that I've learned working with people, to sort of summarize those and to get the crystalline sort of diamond of wisdom that we can all find if we mine the coal seam of dark emotion. And so writing allows us to summarize the things that we've learned. And so as a counselor and therapist, often I'm surprised when I realize that I know something because I've written it down for the first time, but I must have known it in order to write it down. And so writing reinforces the spiritual work with liberation clients and the work
Yeah.
with psychological clients. And
Right.
their work makes me a better writer. So it kind of goes both ways. And
Yeah.
what I would hope that they take from my books is the actual way to deal with your humanity. So I have a free offer to your listeners,
Yeah.
which is to give them a PDF of one of my books called Taming the Three-Ring Circus of Your Mind. And the way that they can get that free PDF is to go to Instagram and DM me at John Labman, that's JONLABMAN, and just send the message Circus 24. So that's John Labman on Instagram, and send the message Circus 24, and I will send them a free copy of my book, Taming the Three-Ring Circus of Your Mind, and that's going to teach them how to deal with their thoughts. And then the most recent book that I've put out, which they'll find on Amazon, will teach them the rest of the path that I offer. And that's called Being Human and Waking Up. But to start out simple and DM me on Instagram at John Labman, ask for Circus 24. And that's the simplest way. Right there is all you need to know about how to deal with your thoughts successfully.
Oh, wonderful. And your website is simplyawake.com?
It is. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, of course.
And they
And
can reach me there, of course, but
Huh.
if they want to get started with that free gift, best
Yeah,
way is on Instagram.
go to Instagram.
Yeah.
On your website, does it have the services you offer, and what services do you offer people?
So yes, it does have a total list of services. I have a number of specialties. I work with trauma, I work with anxiety, I work with spiritual liberation, I work with grief and end of life decisions. So there's a lot of people since COVID who come to me having lost people. There's been a lot of grief in the culture at large. A lot of institutions that we believed in seem not believable anymore. So
Yeah.
people are having trouble with grief. So that's another specialty, but everything is listed there. I also work with gay and bisexual men and with men in general as a specialization, because men particularly have trouble with expressing emotion other than anger, lust, or happiness. And
Right.
so I like to teach men that they can also be sad, and they can be glad, and they can be melancholy, and all those things. So there's some of the specializations. My favorite of all, though, is spiritual liberation. That's what I hope to do more of as time goes on. They'll
Mhm.
also see that I'm offering a course based on the book if they go to my website. It's a 13-week course called Experiments in Being Human and Waking Up. And that's going to start in September. It's only $600 for 13 weeks, and it'll be online on Zoom.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's wonderful.
Thank you.
And yeah, I like that. And so you're doing the class on Zoom and it's live, you said.
Yes.
Would they, if they sign up for it, let's say they missed a date, would you be able to give them a recording, or do you prefer to have them come live?
I really like people to come live where I can
Mhm.
see them and they can see me, and we can be two people together, because the human connection is a very important part of healing. 50% of the healing process of therapy or spiritual liberation work is because of the connection with the teacher or the psychotherapist. And that's
Mhm.
not my figure. That's from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's the international specialist on trauma treatment.
Yeah. And do you do therapy online, or is that a state issue because you have to be licensed in certain states, or doesn't it matter?
It's a good question.
Uh-huh.
I do spiritual work online in any state. We're waiting for Pennsylvania to sign on to an interstate compact of therapists so that I can do counseling in any state. But basically, because I do this crossover work, a lot of the spiritual mentoring work that I'll do with people anywhere in the world has the same components as the psychological work I can do with people in Pennsylvania.
Right, exactly. Yeah. That's wonderful. And our tagline for the Electric Spirit podcast is igniting your spirit. How do you ignite your spirit, John?
You ignite your spirit by realizing that you are already what you're looking for, that God itself is you sitting in the chair that you're sitting in, audience member, and that you don't have to look any further than your own backyard, as Dorothy said in The Wizard of Oz,
Yeah.
because your own backyard, your own heart, is where the Spirit already resides. And that will absolutely burst you into spiritual awakening if you start to notice what's already inside.
Oh, that was beautifully said. And I just wanted to thank you for being here. I don't know if you want to add anything else before we go today.
Just to thank you again for being here and for offering this
Mm.
forum for your listeners and audience, and for those of us who would like to, add to the vibrational expansion of the world. This is, again, a great service that you do, and it's a
Thanks.
free service. And so, audience, please encourage Jamie by liking and broadcasting her to other people. That's all I want to say. Thank you so much, Jamie.
That's so nice of you. Thank you so much. Yeah, we need something like this nowadays because, it's just, I think a lot of people are broken. Unfortunately, that's just what I hear. A lot of people say I'm unhappy, or maybe this could, help people. So that they're not alone.
That's right. That's what we're here for. We're here to tell
Yeah.
them they're not
Right.
alone.
Exactly.
You can help them. I can help them, and other guests that
Yeah.
come on can help them.
Yeah, and definitely. And I'd love to have you back someday, John.
I'd love to come back
It'd be
anytime
great.
you want, and any
Yeah,
questions that you want to ask, I'm thrilled to come back, Jamie. Just anytime.
definitely. Oh, for
Yeah,
sure. Thank you so much.
you're welcome.
Thank you all for watching this here video.